3 days after the final whistle, a letter arrived at FIFA's headquarters in Zurich. Not leaked to the press, not announced through social media, a formal institutional written complaint submitted through official channels by the Algerian Football Federation, naming specific players, a specific referee, and 2 specific moments they say changed the entire shape of a World Cup match. That letter is now sitting on a desk somewhere inside world football's governing body, and the question it raises goes far beyond Algeria, far beyond Argentina, and far beyond one result in the tournament's opening week. Because on the surface, what happened that night looked like history. Lionel Messi, 38 years old, scored a hat-trick as Argentina dismantled Algeria 3-0. In doing so, he equaled Miroslav Klose's all-time record of 16 World Cup goals, a milestone that would have dominated the football conversation for days under any other circumstances. This was supposed to be an uncomplicated story. The greatest player of his generation, likely appearing in his final World Cup, producing something close to perfection against a side that came into the tournament with genuine ambitions of their own. That was the story the world expected to be telling. Instead, Algeria's Football Federation put pen to paper, and suddenly, a 3-0 result became the most institutionally significant dispute this tournament has yet produced. To understand why, you have to go back to what the complaint actually contains. Because the Algerian Federation did not simply express frustration over the scoreline, or question Messi's genius, or suggest their players had been unlucky on a difficult night. According to Algerian media outlets, citing official federation sources, the formal submission to Zurich identifies 2 distinct incidents from the first half, both involving Argentine players, both reviewed or ignored by referee Simon Marciniak and his VAR team, and both in the federation's stated position, left without the punishment the laws of the game required. The first incident arrived in the 32nd minute. Messi's studs made contact with Algerian defender Issa Mandi, raking from knee to ankle, in a motion that brought Mandi to the ground and required treatment. Marciniak awarded the foul. No card followed. Not yellow. Not red. No pitch side monitor review was conducted. VAR examined the footage from multiple camera positions and concluded that no clear and obvious error had been made by the on-field official, allowing the match to continue without further intervention. The Algerian Federation's formal position, set out explicitly in the complaint, is that this challenge met the threshold for a straight red card under the existing laws of the game, as written, and that VAR's failure to correct it represented precisely the kind of consequential officiating error the system was created to eliminate. The second incident is the one that received far less coverage in the immediate aftermath of the match, but which in some ways makes the Federation's argument even harder to dismiss. According to the complaint, Liverpool midfielder Alexis Mac Allister allegedly delivered a deliberate elbow to 18-year-old Algerian forward Ibrahim Maza. The contact, it is alleged, occurred away from the ball and away from the referee's direct line of sight. The Federation claims the officiating crew took no action whatsoever, no foul, no VAR check, no card, no acknowledgement that any contact had occurred at all. Taken individually, each incident might be debated on its own narrow merits. Taken together, the argument the Federation constructs in writing to Zurich becomes something more structured and more serious than a losing team venting at the result. Their case is this: had both incidents been correctly assessed under the existing rulebook, Argentina could have been reduced to 10 men for the better part of the first half, a team playing with 10 men, missing the sport's most influential player at that stage of the match, against an Algerian side that came into this fixture with a point to prove that is a completely different football match. The Federation is not arguing they would have won. They are arguing, formally and in writing, that the scoreline Argentina produced may have been built on a foundation that officiating errors helped construct. Why does a 3-0 defeat, 4 days on, carry this level of institutional weight? Because this is not where Algeria's story of formal complaints begins. In 2022, Algeria were eliminated from World Cup qualification in the dying seconds of extra time against Cameroon. Their federation filed a formal appeal with FIFA, describing the officiating that night as scandalous and requesting the match be replayed. The request was reviewed and denied. Algeria did not go to Qatar. Then earlier this year, following elimination from the Africa Cup of Nations quarterfinals against Nigeria, The federation went through the same institutional process again. A formal complaint submitted to the Confederation of African Football and to FIFA. The scenes surrounding that match were genuinely ugly, with the match referee reportedly requiring a physical escort away from confrontations with Algerian staff members. The federation was subsequently fined $100,000 by CAF for the conduct of players, staff and supporters, including supporters who allegedly directed banknotes at match officials. That appeal against those sanctions remains unresolved as this World Cup continues. 3 tournaments, 3 formal complaints, under 4 years. Whatever position you take on the individual merits of any single dispute, that pattern tells you something specific about the institution making this latest submission to Zurich. This is not a federation reacting emotionally to a single bad night. This is an organization that has consistently chosen the formal institutional route every time it believes the biggest stages have failed to apply the rules with equal rigor. And that consistency is precisely what gives the latest complaint its particular weight. Now place it inside the broader context of this tournament, because Algeria's federation did not file into a vacuum. Their complaint is in fact the 3rd significant VAR controversy of the opening week alone. The first emerged from the Switzerland vs Qatar fixture, where a penalty was awarded and upheld following an offside review, and the decisive visual evidence that justified that decision was never made publicly available to broadcasters or viewers. Gary Neville said directly on air that the call had looked wrong from every angle he could see, and that FIFA owed the watching world a transparent explanation. Wright described the lack of transparency around that decision as scandalous, suggesting the governing body was operating as though accountability to the global audience was optional. The second controversy was the Messi incident itself, debated exhaustively by analysts and former professionals long before Algeria filed a single word with Zurich. Former Manchester City and England youth international Nnetam Onuoha watched the same footage available to any viewer at home and said plainly that in his assessment it should have been a red card, and that the outcome fed directly into a persistent narrative about how the sport's most famous and commercially valuable players are officiated compared to everyone else. Thierry Henry, working as a pundit across this tournament's broadcast coverage, openly acknowledged that credible observers genuinely believed Messi warranted dismissal that night. That is the environment Algeria's formal complaint has now entered, not as a lone voice of protest from a frustrated losing side, but as the most institutionally serious contribution yet to a conversation that television analysts, decorated former players, and now a full National Football Federation have each independently reached from different directions within the same opening week of matches. Which brings the question back to VAR itself, and what it was actually built to do. The system exists to correct the decisive, match-altering errors that human referees in real time cannot always catch. That was the promise. That was the justification for the disruption it introduced to the flow of the game, the controversy it generated in its early years, and the faith football's governing bodies asked supporters and players to extend while it was refined and embedded. If that system is being applied with genuine consistency, if a penalty awarded to a smaller nation receives one level of rigorous scrutiny, while a serious physical challenge involving the sport's greatest player receives a materially different standard of leniency, then the foundational promise VAR was built on becomes a question rather than a guarantee. Algeria's federation is now asking that question formally, in writing, addressed directly to the body responsible for the answer. The realistic outcome here deserves to be stated without inflation. Historically, formal federation complaints, even when submitted through proper institutional channels and supported by time-stamped specific evidence, have not resulted in overturned scorelines. Algeria's own 2022 appeal against Cameroon changed nothing about their absence from Qatar. Their Nigeria complaint from earlier this year remains unresolved, with no change to the result that sent them home from AFCON. The most credible projection for this latest complaint is an internal review of Marquinhos and his crew's performance that night, a process that may affect their future appointments in the tournament, but which will proceed, if it proceeds at all, entirely out of public view. Alongside that, a formal acknowledgement or denial from FIFA's refereeing or disciplinary committee. Argentina's 3-0 victory will not be reversed. That outcome is not what these processes produce, but the complaint's meaning is not exhausted by its likely administrative outcome. Algeria's federation has used the only formal tool available to a nation that believes it has been wronged on football's largest stage, putting its objection permanently into the official record, in writing, directed at the body that appointed and oversees the officials in question. Even if it changes nothing about the scoreline, it becomes part of this tournament's documented history. It places Algeria's institutional voice alongside those of the broadcasters and former professionals who raised the same questions in the days before the letter ever reached Zurich. Consider for a moment what was actually at stake from a human perspective. Ibrahim Maza is 18 years old. That match against Argentina, on that night in that World Cup, was his first senior appearance on the biggest stage in the sport. On the same pitch where Messi was making history at one end, this teenager was playing the most significant match of his young career at the other. Whatever precisely occurred in that alleged off-ball moment with Mac Allister, his own national federation believed what happened to him was real, was deliberate, and was missed entirely by the officials appointed to protect every player on that pitch equally. That is not a tactical footnote in a debate about VR protocols. That is an 18-year-old's introduction to the World Cup, and the institution that represents him standing up to say, formally and for the permanent record, that it deserved to be seen. For Algeria supporters who have followed this team through Cameroon in 2022, through Nigeria earlier this year, and now into this World Cup, carrying its own formal grievance, none of this will read as surprising. It will read as entirely familiar. A pattern they have watched their federation navigate across the biggest moments, against the most significant and commercially valuable opponents, producing a recurring suspicion that the rigor applied to the matches they play in is not always the same rigor applied everywhere else. What happens next will unfold inside FIFA's standard processes, away from cameras and commentary. But the question Algeria put to Zurich in writing is already out there, and the opening week of this tournament has given it more company than anyone expected.